The following program is made possible by Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
It has been less than a year since a cardinal from Argentina was elevated to lead 1 billion Roman Catholics around the world.
In that short time, Pope Francis has reawakened new interest in the church and been named Time Magazine's Man of the Year. Is it a renewal, a revival? We're going to ask our expert on all things Catholic, Catherine Wolff. The game is religion. The game is on. I'm Mark Simon.
I'm Kitty Lopez.
Welcome to the game.
With what might be called miraculous speed, Pope Francis has brought a new spirit to the Roman Catholic Church.
Is it a renewal, even a revival for the church? We ask our resident Catherine Wolff, a resident Catholic expert. Catherine Wolff is editor of the anthology Not Less Than Everything, Catholic Writers on Heroes of Conscience, and a leader and activist in the Catholic communities of Stanford and Santa Clara Universities. Welcome back. It's been a few months. And what a few months.
Lots has happened.
Is it a new church? Is something really new happening?
I think something very old is happening. I think that Francis is taking us in a very, very careful, planful way back to the roots of what Christianity is all about. So that when you say, is this a revival of a church, a renewal of a church, you'd really have to talk about what you mean by the church, where you're seeing in his recent appointments to commissions to clean up the Vatican Bank, or there were new cardinals, a whole new group of very pastoral bishops, very moderate bishops, bishops who did not engage in the culture wars that we've had in the United States. None of them came from the United States, but people who are very, very much in touch with their flock. And that's a renewal of an attitude and of a disposition. It may make nervous those people for whom that kind of architecture, the institution of the church, is very important. I'm not sure you're going to see a renewal of that institution as it is. I think you're going to see something rather new occurring.
So in the sort of bureaucratic sense, he's a reformer.
Oh, yeah.
But in the larger sense of the role and purpose of the church, he's maybe a traditionalist going way back. And I guess the question is he going to succeed in any of this?
I hope so. I will betray my bias. I find him very inspirational and fascinating to watch. I think he is not a naive man. When you look at his experience in Argentina and the terribly difficult time during which he was the superior of the Jesuits down there, he learned a lot. He's had some dark moments in his life, and he describes himself as a sinner. Yeah. And I think it's from that basis that he says things like, who am I to judge? Well, people say, oh, that means gay marriage is going to be okay. Wait a minute, no. It's more about who am I to cast the first stone.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting because it gets to the question of sort of papal humility.
Yeah.
The fact is, not just in the papacy, but I can't think of a lot of sort of renowned role models for humility. In modern culture, but it's interesting in that he clearly seems to genuinely embody this idea that who am I to judge? It may be the best way to encapsulate. It seems to me what he's talking about and who he is.
Well, it certainly proves St. Francis's wonderful dictum that you preach always, use words when necessary, you know? And when you look at the people who have kind of captured the imagination over the last maybe 10, 20, 30 years, you look at Mother Teresa, you look at the Dalai Lama, now you have this Pope. Why is it that these people emerge from this culture of total narcissists and people, yelling to be looked at and to be celebrated. And these people somehow float up and capture our imagination and our attention precisely because they're not like that.
Well, back in May, Catherine, I know you talked about some of the possible reforms that could happen through France's leadership.
Yes.
Is that happening? Are there some reforms that are on the horizon or he's already working on?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I think there are a lot of people who want him to change things, and there are a lot of people who don't want him to change things. And I think he does not start at that level. He knows that he has to appoint people who, through the established processes of the church, will actually bring the church to a more pastoral position. He's appointing people who don't look to this church as a strict hierarchy, but really want a more collegial way of being church together. That has to happen before anybody comes in and says, I'm going to say that artificial contraception is now fine. That's not going to happen. But it may be that many years down the line, probably after this wonderful man has gone on, it may be that through a process of collegiality and dialogue, that some of those hot button issues really will be resolved, maybe in ways that we can't even think about.
It's important to remember the church doesn't hurry. I mean,
much as we'd like.
Yeah, well, it's an institution with a long history, and it has a history of being much more flexible and adaptable than people realize, which is probably why it survived.
It survived, exactly.
But that doesn't mean, when you count time in the context of the Catholic Church, what is a year?
Yes.
It's interesting, you keep using the word pastoral, and it speaks of somebody who wants the church to be closer to the people.
Absolutely. He wants his priests to smell like their sheep. I love it. He's got all
these.
Said that? Oh yeah, he's got all these pithy phrases. He says he doesn't want his priests to have faces like pickled peppers or to have vinegar in their hearts. I mean, those are really rich, strong images. But he talks again and again about this encounter that you have with people. And think back to Jesus. Jesus did not sit around giving out the playbook. He encountered people. He encountered the woman in the well. He told Zacchaeus to come down to the tree because he was going to come eat dinner at his house. It was all in the encounter. There you see Francis grabbing people who are not people you would necessarily reach out to and physically embracing them. And that is a powerful, powerful message. And I think that that is something that clearly is very vital to him, and he is preaching loud and clear to us that we really need to do that. There's something essential to the Christian faith that you encounter the person who is in need, who is poor, who's marginalized. And he says, when you do that, your heart will grow bigger.
So as a value, that you could probably describe that as be of service.
Yes.
I would think.
But not in a noblesse oblige way, really in a way of entering the other person's reality and honoring their humanity and the humanity that you share.
Well, and that the best way to get to heaven is to give things away, not keep them.
Absolutely.
But it raises the question, those are values that I think a lot of people think have been missing. They feel good to be hearing them. And then he clearly thought he needed to talk a little bit about the throwaway society, which was also the way he got to the issue of abortion. So what other values are we likely to see there, and how are they likely to be expressed, and which ones are likely to make us a little uncomfortable?
Well, I think he's probably capable of making all kinds of people uncomfortable, depending on what their sort of hobby horse is. Certainly when he came out with this, what they call an apostolic exhortation, late last year, called Evangelii Gaudium. He ruffled feathers on all sides. You know, he ruffled the feathers of people who...
No, I'm sorry. Let me stop you there, because we're going to take a quick break. Hold that thought.
I will hold that thought.
We'll be right back. Stick with us.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. Nationally, we've committed even more. In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Welcome back to The Game. I'm Mark Simon.
I'm Kitty Lopez.
And over here we have Catherine Wolff, who is editor of I've forgotten the name of the book. I'm sorry.
It's too long.
No, not less than everything.
There you go.
Right, Catholic Writers on Heroes of Conscience. She's our Catholic expert. Somebody has to be, for God's sake. We were talking a little bit off the air. We started talking about this throwaway society, and it certainly speaks to the culture wars, but it was interesting that he included abortion in there.
And I think he very purposely is not identifying or speaking specifically on what we would call the button issues that we have seen highlighted in the culture wars. He ruffled a lot of feathers with this exhortation, talking very sternly about the system of capitalism and how, it sanctions profit for the few, but at the cost to so many, and that we need to...
I didn't know he was a Democrat.
I think he really is consciously staying away from playing any politics at all, so that he, in an even-handed way, the same sort of spirit that he brings to saying, watch out about leaving people left out in the market, to watch out about throwing people away for your own convenience,
Well, it's another way of looking at it. The issue of abortion is one where I think a lot of people don't want people to have them, but they don't want to tell people they can't have them if they need one.
Indeed. I think it's always a tragedy. There is to some degree a human life that is being snuffed out. There are, in my mind, this is my personal, it is the cessation of a human life. There are very rare, painful times, and we've seen some of them in the news lately, where tragically it's necessary. And so I think a lot of people think that, wouldn't do it for themselves, would never have an abortion of choice, honor and respect life, but understand that there are certain times when, maybe even just for medical reasons, it's absolutely necessary.
Does Francis have, politicians have kind of an agenda that they might outline for the coming years? Does Francis have something like that he wants to kind of, again, getting back to the reforms or things that he wants the church to look at and address?
Yes. I think his recent appointments to these commissions are very clear. Okay. And it's normal as we were talking for a leader to put their own people into places where they can carry out their agenda, but why not? And the appointments have been really eloquent in terms of the fact that lots of new cardinals from lots of places that never had cardinals before, none from the United States, all very pastoral men of the people. And I think that's very much part of his plan. I think he's a very astute man, as well as being very spirit-filled. I mean, he's got this great sort of human embrace, but I think he knows exactly what he's doing.
Well, part of his agenda has to be reverse the decline in membership.
Indeed.
And I guess, Kitty, you and I were talking off the air about this a little bit, about the idea of, they were losing people. The church has been losing people, especially in places where you thought historically there was growth opportunities in South America and places like that. So how does all that fit into what he's doing?
Well, I think you come out of the papacy, the later papacy of John Paul and that of Benedict, where it seemed as though there was a real effort to consolidate, to draw in almost a stockade mentality where the church was the preservation place where the truth and the moral code was being preserved, and the world outside was a mess and obviously frightening. Well, Francis has absolutely the opposite view. He goes out there. We're already living in the kingdom. Creation is blessed. It's a very different attitude.
But does that lead to more people in the church? Because we've talked several times about some of the things that drive people away.
Yes.
And it's sort of like the question of style versus substance. Mm-hmm. Well, he's got a style that's embracing and embraceable.
Yeah.
Some of those issues on things like the women's role in the church,
sure,
and abortion and gay rights. Mm-hmm. He can be as warm as fuzzy as he wants to. If the church still condemns that behavior,
right, then
how does someone decide to embrace the church?
Well, I do think it's partly because of what we were talking about before, that he is a tremendously charismatic figure who seems authentically to want to embrace everybody, and people really are drawn to that. I would imagine his strategy is that if we get back to a way of being inviting, and of preaching the gospel in a way that it is actually good news, that it's solace to people, that really will be attractive to people, and that there are rules now about gay marriage or about abortion, some of these hot button issues, that are very difficult to understand and are off-putting for people when they look at the church as simply a place of rules. But if they are drawn in a level of love, they may see some, at least come to understand those rules better. And if the rules are somehow taught in a way that recognize that we're all sinners and that we're all pilgrims and that none of us have a complete understanding of any of these phenomena yet, and that we go ahead with humility, that's an attractive thing too. I mean, there isn't a club or an organization I belong to where I agree with absolutely everything.
Yeah.
But it's that kernel. It's that kernel of really being the conduit of God's love to people.
But there's an element of alienation for some of these issues.
Yeah, and people have been hurt.
And how do you get past that, other than saying, well, I'm a nicer guy than the last guy who condemned you? But we have the same view on who you are and what you're about.
Well, Francis is an important figure in this, but I hope and pray. And I know that the people on the ground, and I can honestly say that every priest I've talked to is so excited because they have been given marching orders to be a very different kind of priest.
They can minister in ways they weren't allowed to before?
Yes.
On that question, we're going to take a break.
Okay.
And we'll be right back. Stay with us.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. Nationally, we've committed even more. In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Welcome back to the game. I'm Mark Simon.
I'm Kitty Lopez.
And over here is Catherine Wolff, our Catholicism expert. Thanks for being here.
We were talking at the break, Catherine, you've mentioned Francis' humility, his way, his inclusionary way, and I guess I'm still trying to think, is that going to be enough to bring people back to the church?
No, not unless it happens on the ground. Not unless parish priests, bishops really take a long step back and say, this is a very different way of approaching the faithful. You can't legislate faith, and that seems to have been their kind of MO for a while. You can't say people, you don't belong because you don't believe 1 out of 10 doctrines. That doesn't draw people in. This invitation, this sense that we're all flawed, this sense that we're all on a journey together, this sense that we're not to judge each other. Because if I judge you for being gay, God knows you can probably judge me for being arrogant or something worse.
Yeah, that line, I hate the sin, not the sinner, has a certain underlying arrogance to it. Do you think this is liberating to a lot of priests, in particular American priests, who live in a modern society where there are gays all around them. Many of marriage is legal in California for same-sex couples. Is this sort of a watershed moment for them?
Because they're the ones who are confronted with the people who come in with some very thorny human situation, and he has to help them find their way through it and try to be loving and responsible and prayerful as they do it. And if it comes to a resolution that isn't exactly what fits with the rules, pastorally, that may be what's possible. And the good priests I know, that's how they work.
They find a way.
They sure do. Yeah. They sure do.
It's there's a host of issues we can talk about that were among those that tended to alienate people. One of them is celibacy, the fact that priests can't marry, is probably having a huge impact on the number of people who choose to become priests.
Right.
You see any changes in that coming? Not necessarily overturning the doctrine of celibacy, but finding a way
Celibacy for priests is not a doctrine, it's a rule. You know,
So
priests
it can be
didn't get
changed.
married, you know, they were getting married for the first
It's like all those people who went to purgatory because they eat meat on Friday and suddenly they're not going anymore,
I
right?
know, what are we going to do with them? Yes, that's not a doctrine, and that can be changed. And there are plenty of married priests in the Catholic Church because they were Anglicans who came in and brought their wives.
Could you see that changing in the lifetime of this Pope?
Yes, I do.
Wow.
I do.
Wow.
I do.
And women in the church?
That will take longer. That will take longer. I do not see. Francis has said very intriguing things about expanding the role of and deepening the role of women in the church. I don't think he sees women being plugged into the clerical model that we have right now. I think he kind of wants to get rid of that clerical model before we start seeing what are the gifts of everybody out there. You know,
does that come sort of along the same lines of it used to be that only priests could give communion, now other people can,
of course,
including some of the churches I've been to, women. So is that an example of what you're talking about? How you suddenly change who can do what used to be traditional priestly duties, and you've changed the priesthood without overtly doing so?
Yes, and it has been slowly happening. And so that this would not be quite such a dramatic change as I think that people outside the church might think.
Yeah. Same-sex marriage.
I think that, polls have shown that most Catholics understand that that's in the civil realm, that's a reality. We know that in lots of Latin American countries and other places, you have to have a civil wedding. In fact, my own son did this. You have to have a civil wedding, and then you have your church wedding. It's really the churches and the state interests in marriage have been very melded together for the past 1,000 years ago or so, but they're coming apart a little bit, and I think Catholics are realistic about the fact that there is such a thing as a civil institution of marriage. And then there is a sacramental view of marriage, so that there's no reason why there can't be people who are civilly married and people who are sacramentally married. Are gay people going to be sacramentally married anytime soon? I don't imagine so. Will there be blessings of gay unions? Will there be blessings of second or third heterosexual marriages? Well, I think those are already going on.
Yeah, and I guess the same question is, it starts with if you're in a same-sex marriage, are you allowed to take the sacraments, which I guess is the first threshold.
It depends on which parish you're in, what your pastor says. We're talking about forms, sacramental forms to speak to deep truths and to deep human experiences, but perhaps have shapes and forms and rituals and gestures that don't really fit where we are right now. And so to say, is this going to fit into this form? I'm thinking this form's going to be changing because the reality is really requiring another form.
Yeah. Right. The first couple of shows we've done together, you were overtly frustrated by the state of the Catholic Church. There were things about it that bothered you, and we talked any number of times off the air about posing this question and never got to it, but this may even be a better time, which is, then why stay?
Yeah.
To me, it was a fair question before. Is it a question with a whole different freight to it now?
I wouldn't call it freight. I would call it energy. I would call it hope. Actually, I mean, when I did that, the reason I did that book was to gather the voices of people I respected to tell us about people throughout history who had been in struggle with the church in some way, but really maintained the faith. And what I took heart from those testimonies was that they had such a powerful faith in God that they kind of set the church over there and kind of went on doing their thing. And now we don't really have to think that way. You know, now I feel included in a way that I was feeling very much excluded. And it's kind of crazy to think of kind of a German-Irish Catholic who went through umpteen years of Catholic schooling and has been on pastoral councils in parishes for years, etc., not feeling included. But there were a lot of us who weren't. And so I have to say there's a great wellspring of hope. People talk about feeling as though a great weight has been lifted that they didn't even know they were carrying around.
What is astonishing is that one person can make this kind of change.
I was just thinking that same thing, that here's this leader that can just, it's opening up the door.
But it speaks to how much people needed it and wanted it.
It was that convergence of being at the right time. I mean, people were hungry
Very hungry
for that, and here
Absolutely.
he comes.
Yeah.
Well, there's a saying, I'm sure you can quote it, you know, God delivers the right person for the right time.
That's right.
Oh, I think we're seeing this happen right now. It's very inspiring.
So, as a reformer, he's going to make a lot of people angry.
Yeah.
Because
he's not going to do what they want him to do.
Does he survive that?
Oh, I hope so. I think that, I mean, what is he, 77, 78 years old? As I said, I pray for him. A very long life for this wonderful man. Maybe he's got 10 or 12 years. He knows that he has to lay the groundwork by getting the right people in place.
And I have to stop you there.
Oh, what a shame. Well, we'll see. We'll come back right back.
We'll have another time. Catherine Wolff, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Mark Simon.
I'm Kitty Lopez.
Thanks for being with us, and join us next time on The Game.